This is Brad Reynolds. I'm the SVP of AI at Expedient. I had the opportunity last week to sit down with Brian Smith, our CEO, and discuss our plan and how we would help others, CEOs and board members plan for their 2024 AI strategy. We're going to be going over 5 key areas you need to address in crafting that strategy, and we're going to be giving you a Q&A session afterwards of 30 minutes so that we can discuss live questions that you may have about the webinar. I wanted to welcome everybody to Expedient's webinar on building your 2024 enterprise AI strategy. Myself, Brad Reynolds, I'm the Senior Vice President of Artificial Intelligence at Expedient. And my co-part in this is Brian Smith, the CEO of Expedient. The overview of this, what you're going to get out of it is operator questions that you need to be asking yourself and your board in terms of crafting an AI strategy. This isn't going to be an Expedient conversation. It's going to be what you can take away to kind of craft your business for the coming year. Our strategy discussion is going to go over 5 core points, and these are points that I've found in consulting for the last 2 years before I came on board with Expedient. These are the steps that everybody needs to go through in terms of answering questions so that you can get to the point of implementing AI in 2024. So with that, I want to ask Brian some questions in your CEO hat of Expedient. What are some of the key organizational concerns you were thinking about when we were crafting an AI strategy for 2024?
I think a large portion of it is just where does it fit? And I think there's a big concern also for people on the fear of missing out. They're not exactly sure, what it means for them to start, but they know that there's a big risk of not figuring out how AI fits into the business. And most of the conversations around AI are the impact that it can have for the business for areas of efficiency, giving insights to data and information that were never really available before to have better decisions for the business, and also giving insights for opportunities that may have been missed. So those are some of the core pieces, in addition to how can you increase the efficiency and the day-to-day people inside your organization. Is that similar to when you were working with outside companies, how those trends align?
That's definitely one of the kind of core concerns that folks need to address. What I've found is that most folks they understand the power of AI, but they need to set the stage a little bit of how they're going to capitalize on that. And so some of the stage setting that needs to be done is, what am I going to need from my board? Do I need skill sets on my board? Do I need outside consultants that could help me in terms of the governance around AI? And then probably maybe even on a more important level, great, we think that there's a strategy here, but who's going to go implement that internally? Are we going to, as a CEO, are we going to give it to the CIO? But who's concentrating on AI inside of an organization, and how much are they concentrating it? Or is it just an add onto work that they're already doing? Figuring out that kind of component of who's handling it, do I have board alignment, do I have board support, are kind of really critical aspects that usually indicate success if you're able to align those. But one of the other ones that I was interested to get your perspective on is AI policy. Mm-hmm. Like how important is kind of the rules of engagement and guardrails from like a formal perspective for what you did at Expedient?
Sure, and the policy leads into one of the major concerns that the board has in there, which is security. So their 2 biggest questions were, how do we do something that we know we're not really leaking our data and getting at external access to our private information, but also just where's the right place to start where some of those big concerns from the board perspective. So when we think about the strategy as a whole, a big portion of it is it has to align to where you're going with the business. So you have to think, are you a business that wants to be very pro leveraging AI inside the business, so you're going to make adjustments and craft a message and a policy for employees that aligns with that, versus something that's it could be the opposite, very draconian, where there's no AI access period, you're going to block all external access. So that's just that base first thing you have to decide internally. But when we thought about a healthy policy, it really ties into other data privacy things or data protection pieces of, do you have a good audit trail? Do you know what is being consumed? Is it going to be different for something that we do internally on a private AI deployment versus something that's being used from a publicly accessible tool? And we found that there's even nuances from, is this data that's being passed through kind of a user interface from a public tool versus an API, because the data privacy pieces were actually very different, surprisingly different, between just how you access the tools along the way. So having those different components, making sure that it aligns with your overall compliance structure that you have for the business. But one of the biggest things was making sure that all of the employees understand that they're ultimately responsible as a human for anything that they consume and use out of AI. So that it can't be determined that it's absolute fact because it's coming from the tool, that they still own all that accountability and all that responsibility to make good use of it.
Yeah, I think that's key. There's a lot more nuance than just saying there's a generative AI policy for our company. And we're actually, for kind of one of the outputs of this talk, we're going to be giving everybody in the success packet an example of a generative AI policy that you could potentially repurpose to your own that covers a lot of those points. Additionally, some examples of other folks' generative AI policies, like the city of Boston, just so you have ideas about what people are thinking about. But so you have a policy in place, you have some board understanding and alignment, you have a person that could potentially spearhead some of this AI work for you in 2024. The first step of, we'll call it shadow IT remediation, or shadow AI remediation, but the concept of internal employees at Expedient are using ChatGPT right now, even before the policy. So how do you kind of get a guardrail or a control around that so that you can kind of launch in the next year?
Yeah, I think those two are really intertwined, because you have the policy that is going to set those guardrails and the framework on what's acceptable, what's not acceptable inside the business, what type of information you could put in. But policy is one piece, but it doesn't really have enforcement unless you're tracking everything. And most of the uses of public AI tools, you wouldn't have any observability and tracking to see what's being entered to begin with. So we've been using the term shadow AI because it's very similar to the connotation of shadow IT, where shadow IT is when other departments can really circumvent central IT and go leverage and do their own thing and build their own application, get their own infrastructure. Shadow AI is very similar because it's such a consumerized product. It's easy access. You can get on your phone, you could get it on your on a browser. And so the policy can be that first area. But as part of the policy enforcement, we also took additional steps for implementing things that would block access to certain sites. But blocking it isn't enough, because people are just going to find other ways to go around to get access because there's so much value there. So you really have to give them a really positive alternative option that's more powerful than what they get from a single tool. So we leveraged different technologies so that we could encrypt and protect our own data before it goes out to an external model, but also giving them options for internal AI models that may actually be more specific to their different use cases and the work that they're doing inside the business day to day.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the shadow AI stuff, and one of the important points to kind of grasp from an organizational perspective is there are lots of AI options at the buffet. ChatGPT and OpenAI is one, but there are others. There are internal options, there are coding options, there's graphical options, and the notion of you attract more with honey is kind of, I think, the strategy that you need. So the notion that you're going to want to use OpenAI for some things, great. How do you protect your company to be kind of in line technically with the legal policy that you put in place? I think it's a huge area, and we've developed our own tools to be able to do that, but definitely something that everybody's got to put as the first step of what they do after they kind of define the high level stuff. So you have shadow IT or shadow AI implemented to remediate it a little bit. What are kind of the next steps? Like, what's the next thing that you're thinking about once you have the basic blocking and tackling done to give you an alternative to ChatGPT?
So the next thing is really the enablement inside the business of helping people understand. And it's amazing. You can actually use some of the tools to help you with the enablement so that you can do a session where you provide access to tooling for your users and then have them interact and ask questions about their role, their job, how they could benefit, and it starts sparking ideas. So pretty quickly, you want to get the adoption so you're getting value out of that. And that initial type of chat interface is beneficial, but it's not giving you access to your private data and incorporating your pieces in there. So I think the next real thing is, as a company, you have to agree on what are the strategic projects that you want to go after, and what are the things that can have the biggest benefit, and you have to balance of the biggest benefit versus effort and determine what's the right ratio for where you should start. But pretty quickly there's some other things that pop up. Curious, as you've done consulting, what are some of those key projects that you've seen, or the process people go through to vet what's a good place to start a proof of concept or a project to bring to the surface?
So that's a really interesting question, because I do want to touch on the nuance of how we've done some things at Expedient, which differs from what I've done in the consulting side. On the consulting side, I've mostly found folks who have an idea of a use case, something to improve customer support quality or improve a customer direct experience by accessing a database on the back end. But those were novel use cases. Mm-hmm. They didn't exist in the business before. We're going to use AI to maybe be transformative. And so that's what I've been doing, and it accesses private data, uses private models, all that kind of stuff. But I think folks are missing something if they go immediately to a use case that is intended to be transformative, mm-hmm. because you need to get the whole organization bought into AI. So I was interested in what you said in terms of how can we use AI to touch on objectives and key results that were already in flight. And so from a CEO or a board perspective, thinking about showing value as quickly as possible. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do proof of concepts that could be transformative. They definitely keep those in mind. But where your organization is going to unite around the AI, what it offers to a business is to see things that they've been working on for a quarter or a year suddenly get unlocked in terms of value. So I felt that to be probably the primary path you should think of in use case, and then secondarily, maybe next generation or transformative aspects of how you could use language models to do things.
Yeah, that aligns really well to what our approach was, because one of the concerns with AI, especially right now, is it's such an over-discussed topic, and it means so many different things to folks as well. So there's a risk of it becoming kind of the next shiny penny versus actually having real impact. So when we looked at our use cases, we started actually with a bunch of what-if questions. So we took the 3 biggest initiatives that we had going on inside the business and said, what if this was capable? What if, what would the impact be if we could do this? And then we started asking, well, what's the impediment? Why can't that be done? And what are the challenges? And one of the common themes was certain pieces of information were accessible and ready to be used. And then there were other things where the data really wasn't accessible and there was a lot of effort. So then we had to think about some of those different components to help prioritize one project to another so that we could have early quick wins, but for specific things that tied to the core existing objectives, because then the entire business could see that we were staying aligned with what the core goals were, but also the impact that AI could have in those specific areas.
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on a couple of things that I heard there. One is, to implement these AI strategies, what structure have you put in place to go and execute on this inside of the business? You talked about things that align to a bunch of different OKRs that we have, but does that mean there's 50 people involved in kind of making those things happen? How did you figure out how to make that work within the structure of the existing entity?
Well, definitely using OKRs is a big part of it, so that there's clear alignment of what the goals are and when we're expecting to have different chunks of work being done. But then we really set up almost like a startup inside the business. But instead of having people that were dedicated to that team, we took individuals from different teams and are hiring additional people into the business that will report onto those existing teams. So we don't build something that's not sustainable and doesn't align with the rest of the way that we operate the business. Plus, by bringing that expertise locally into the different teams, it helps really propagate the knowledge and share that to accelerate the overall learning.
Yeah, I definitely think that interweaving the goals of AI with the organization responsibly takes a specific strategic plan, but that's where you get leverage and acceleration of the kind of strategy. The other thing that I heard you say about some of how we're looking to implement AI internally was about the data. Something about, hey, the data could be in the right place, and some of this data is not necessarily in the right place, and how is it labeled and how is it presented? Sure. How does the data story integrate into the AI story?
Yeah, I'd almost say they're the same thing. The value of data is the value of AI and how you consume it and how you use it. But there were some really monumental learnings early on that were some aha moments that were surprising. And some of those were almost the way that we think about data almost gets flipped and put on its head, because historically you've thought of the most recent data as the most valuable. So when you open an Office program, it shows you, here's your recent files that you're working on. Or when you're doing backups, you keep your a certain volume in hot storage, and then it gets colder the older it is. And so historically, people, and Expedient also, have stored data at different tiers to balance cost and retention requirements, but also had different protocols that they use in different places. So you may have one thing that's for an object store, a different thing that's for a Windows server. And we found very quickly that much of that data wasn't accessible to what we were trying to do from AI. So we needed to look at the overall structure of that, but then also what's the appropriate data that we want to make accessible? How do you put the data governance around it so only the right people have access to the right pieces of information? So there's a lot of time and effort to get all of your data AI ready, and that's a large portion of where you should focus early on, is understanding where data is at, what you'd want to use, how you would classify that, and then putting in the automated process to keep good health and work on the projects that you can access right now, and then move to others as you make progress.
Yeah, I see the AI conversation being a business conversation where we kind of understand what AI can do, and we want it to solve these business problems. Now, if we define that as the use case at the CEO level, board level, CIO level, how do we go accomplish that? Step one, often, once you've defined your use case, is, okay, where is the internal data that we're going to need to consume, and how do we move it, store it, present it in a way that the AI logic reasoning engine can kind of access to drive some insights? But that brings up a nuance in terms of like one of our internal use cases, which is we have trouble ticketing systems that involve our own internal knowledge. They involve client knowledge. They can involve proprietary information related to clients. We have regulations and audits that we're subject to. How do you wrap your mind around all of the requirements with data so that we can use AI, but in a responsible fashion, given the things that we've committed to our clients and our employees?
Yeah, one of the things that helped give comfort to both myself and the board when we're looking at that is how we can put those guardrails around those pieces of information. So we got pretty comfortable if we said that data doesn't ever exit our current environments, and the workload and the AI pieces sit directly adjacent to it versus streaming it out to an external public AI tool. So the way that we're really accomplishing that is there's certain things that we can do that may be a chat for common questions and things that would go and access a public tool. But then to have access to those groups of data, it's limited to a private model that we're running on infrastructure that's inside our data center that's directly adjacent and connected to those sources of data, so that we have a lot more control over those capabilities.
Can you touch a little bit more on the private AI aspect? I've heard private come up a lot. I've also heard public in terms of the AI kind of clouds that you can access. In the context of that use case or in general, tell me about kind of like what the private infrastructure is and how accessible that is to a general company like any of the folks watching the webinar.
We may actually want to zoom out even further because I think a large portion of the AI conversations, probably 80% of what's going on right now, people are so focused on training their own model. And so they think of that can't really be done internally because they can't get enough access to GPUs to build their own and build their own private. So I think you need to think about that first. And one of the best analogies here, I would say, is when you think of the training process in the whole AI journey, that's kind of like the time in your life that you spent learning to walk. Most people, in a period of 2 to 3 months from the first time they start stand up, they're fully walking. But then they use that skill for the rest of their life. And the training piece is likely going to be done in a public area, like a public cloud, or more likely even a specialized cloud, and for something that's built for that purpose. But most companies aren't going to even do their own training. It would be like purchasing, if you're doing your own training, that's like going to and purchasing a car from an auto parts store. You just don't do that, or it's pretty rare. And so think about that, you're going to be picking multiple models likely that fit your business, and then you can run those on your own private hardware. So it's a matter of actually having not one model that you're going to run, but you're likely in your business going to run multiple different models for different use cases for different departments. And by having that specialization of the models, they each get smaller and smaller the more specialized they are. So that's part of the way that it can be cost effective to run that in a private environment.
Yeah, I think there's, like with all AI stuff, there's just updates that happen on a daily, weekly basis and things that are a monumental change. About 4 months ago, Meta came out with an open source model that, just think about it as a mega piece of software that you could download and run on your own servers or a cloud set of servers, but it's dedicated to you. And that didn't exist before, not in any substantial size. So it's now thinking about it as an engineering concern of, for those applications where I need to keep the boundaries very tight and underneath my control, we'll just say, first of all, from privacy, but also from what happens when an outside model gets updated and some business process flow that you were depending on suddenly changes. You don't have version control. So you can put that under your control, log it, and put all the normal kind of monitoring and capability effects around that model. But that's a novelty. Like, that didn't exist too long ago. That then gives you the private basis from where you can extend that. So you can take models like that or other models and customize them to your business. But like, one example that really resonated with me at Expedient is we have a relatively large source code library of all the different modules and applications that we've built. We want to take that foundational coding model and let it learn the way that we speak about code, because every company has their own language when it comes to marketing or code. We'd never upload that to any sort of public model for many reasons, but be able to host that ourselves, we can actually modify that model to speak more like a really highly trained employee, and they're in our office, for all intents and purposes. So I think that there's a revolution coming on, and you had mentioned training and the whole, you spend a year of your life learning to walk, that's training, and then 80 years walking. That's what in the industry is a term called inference, but it just means running the model in your operation. And I think that there's a revolution coming in inference where you can use models that speak code, that speak general purpose, that speak SQL, that speak even things like accounting and all the different kind of nuances in language. And that's coming down the pike. So as you're a CEO or a board member or a CIO, the notion that you have the control now again to say, hey, these things, let's do that internally. It meets all of our rules and restrictions. Or for certain businesses that are highly regulated, let's do everything internally. We can't take even an iota of chance being out. And for other businesses, let's do some of it internally, but some of it we're okay using some of these best of breed image generators for marketing or GPT for other internal operational things. But it's kind of like the CIO now has the control over the levers and the CEO has control over levers. But you have to have that strategy plan in place so that you realize where the levers are and which ones you're going to pull in what situations. So yeah, that's I think the kind of core in terms of what you can do privately versus publicly.
Yeah, I think of it very similar to cloud. Early in cloud, people had this belief that everything's going to go into the hyperscale cloud. And 15, 20 years into that, they realized that that's not really where things ended up. And it's more like 30% there, and then the rest in other private or types of cloud, either on-premises or through alternate service providers. And the AI piece is likely very similar. There's going to be certain things that it makes total sense to run off a public model. And then there's other things that you want inside your business where you're going to have those additional security layers where you want to be able to have your own change control from when you move from model version 1 to model version 2. And those are things that may be more unique to your business. Those could be things that it's more because it's accessing your specific data that's sitting next to it and the speed that you need to do those connections. And all those are different pieces that also build confidence in your team that you're going to have a good experience because they have more control over some of those components. So the same reasons that people have made decisions to put different applications in different clouds, I think that same mentality works really well for why you would put certain things in different types of models or different types of AI use cases.
We've developed this strategy internally at Expedient, and as you're looking out at 2024 and thinking about how did we set the stage, how did we provide an alternative to shadow AI, how did we get our data ready, and how are we thinking about the whole public and private? Show us kind of the map for 2024 for Expedient and how you're looking to drive value out of AI.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of Q4 of this year is getting the additional foundational pieces and expanding the knowledge base inside the organization as a whole. And so there's certain areas like the protected chat or eliminating that shadow AI component is something that we have available to the employees. So that helps accelerate and also build confidence in using AI and so they can see how that it improves their efficiency. And then as we are getting our data ready and AI ready and in different areas, the first areas that we have will be injecting our own information and data into those private models that stay inside of Expedient, and those use cases start to get deployed at the end of this year. And then as the other components and data becomes accessible, and sometimes we have to write new APIs, others is moving storage from older platforms into our current AI platforms. Each of those stages unlocks things, but each one is an incremental value that we're giving to the business along the way. It's not like a waterfall project where you have to wait till the end and that you get everything all at once. Each one of these releases that we have, different teams and different groups are seeing a big difference in the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting ride in 2024 for us, but I think the part that I'm most excited about being in the AI bubble or the AI entrepreneurial startup inside of Expedient is that I can see how the things that we're working on tie into the rest of the business. We do it through OKRs. Other people have different methods to do that, but you don't want it to happen in a bubble. You want folks to know that when they're doing these things, they're making a difference in terms of the overall operation, and then that makes you feel good. It's a great feedback loop. So thanks for giving us all of your insight and capabilities in terms of the AI plan and strategy for 2024. And in terms of the folks on the call, these are kind of the 5 concrete steps that you have to go through to be able to say, okay, I'm ready to go and implement a proof of concept that involves some sort of AI inference internally. You need to understand setting the stage. You need to understand where your data is. And then at that point, your use cases, you can figure out, do I want to do things publicly or privately? But the kind of summary words that I'll leave you with is we can't be wringing our hands about AI. You need to be responsible about it. You need to put a policy in place, but in the words of Nike, just do it. You have to start doing things with AI, getting employees using it, and it's a little scary. There's just no two ways about it. There's all kinds of knowledge that none of us have a complete idea of, and we're going to be learning about it. But just doing it, taking a few steps forward, taking a few steps after that is the core to being able to realize the value out of your 2024 strategy. And as a summary, we'll be sending out a success packet that covers a lot of detail in each of these areas. So for example, some policy examples, links to McKinsey reports on what you should be thinking about in generative AI, links to reports from like Harvard Business and KPMG about how the CEO and the board should be interacting as it relates to AI, newsletters that you can subscribe to. But the reality is a lot of information that we've curated to say these are some things that if you read them, you'll probably be able to have a couple valuable takeaways to use in your own 2024 strategy and implementation. So thanks, Bryan. I'm always a pleasure talking, and look forward to doing a great job in 2024.
I'm looking for the delivery of it.
Okay, thanks everybody for participating in the webinar that we taped with Bryan and myself. Just wanted to start opening up the floor to questions. If you see the QR code in the upper left of the screen, that just sets an email that gets delivered to us, and we put your question in the queue. So I think we already have a variety of questions queued up, so I think we'll go with the first one. So one that we received in was, how do companies transition from a successful proof of concept to an enterprise-wide adaptation? And I think this is a really important question, and there's probably a lot of folks on the call who haven't even gotten to a POC. The POC is a great first step, but assuming you have a POC in place and you want to get to an enterprise adaptation, you now have to be thinking about all of the scaling, privacy concerns, all the things that might not have been relevant when you were just trying to get things working. And so when you're thinking about scaling, you're thinking about, okay, what happens if I have 1,000 people using this or 100 people using this? How many server resources do I need and all that kind of stuff? Do I want to handle that internally? And so what you're going to be thinking about is, who do I need to lean on? And do I have the knowledge internally to be able to do it? And so that's a kind of a huge thing that you're thinking about as in terms of turning from POC to kind of enterprise-wide adaptation. Bryan, did you have some insights into that?
I think that's really good. The only thing I would add is really that if you can get different key stakeholders involved in that mid stage of that proof of concept, so they get comfortable with it, they're building trust. It's really going to help with the adoption, because you're not going to have people throwing stones at the end. They were part of the process along the way, and also part of the way that we dealt with that is taking projects that were key priorities already, and that the entire company was already bought into and leaning into, and using AI in our proof of concepts to accelerate those initiatives also really helped with the overall adoption.
Okay, let's go on to the next question. So what are some of the use cases of AI with robotic process automation to further achieve almost 100% automation? So there's some broad concepts around AI and maybe some visions or dreams of what it can deliver for an organization. And one of those visions is you can delegate a chain of tasks to a single robot or AI robot or a set of robots, and have a set of tasks being executed by an agency. We haven't seen this actually working well in the wild, but it's kind of what a lot of people want, to be able to take a big chain of tasks and automate them. What we have seen in terms of use cases is to take one specific thing, like, for instance, at the end of a customer service support ticket, to have a robot evaluate whether the customer's request got answered correctly, and then hand it off to a human. And what we found is that you need those human check-in points along the way, but the human reviewing that ticket could take minutes. The robot takes seconds, and the human's not involved. So essentially, you're kind of getting to almost 100% automation, but you have little interleaved slices of human along the way to make sure that things don't go off the rails. And that's kind of currently where the AI thought is. We know there's going to be a lot of innovation in terms of being able to fully automate it or automate more of those chains without human check-in. Just haven't seen it yet in the wild, but we're looking closely. Bryan, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think part of the point of having the humans involved in the middle at this stage is about building confidence and seeing that the pieces that you're engaging the AI before it goes over to the RPA is functioning correctly and it's making the correct decision that your human would as well. It is part of that confidence process. But I do think that there's some use cases that would be pretty top of mind that you think of from the client support perspective, where people use current chatbots that are more programmatic versus an AI having a much broader type of conversation. And then when it gets to the end of that type of conversation, engaging the RPA to complete a specific task or confirming with the person you're chatting with that you'd like it to take the next step and execute it on your behalf so you could tie that chain together. Or if you're thinking like on a supply chain, if you're somebody that's a large distributor or manufacturer, you may have the AI algorithm that's really going through that larger pool of data and understanding the demand you have, understanding where your supply disruptions are going, and you could adjust some of the routes, and then the RPA could really make those automatic adjustments in the order, do the notifications of people, and push that down the chain. So I think that you would start with small chunks along the way, and just like you do with a lot of coding, that you break it up into smaller chunks and then do deployment so you're getting incremental value as you go.
Makes sense. Okay. Given the current business objectives and the potential of AI, how do I figure out the priorities of investment for the next year? Bryan, I'll let you do this one first, and I'll chime in since you're in control of a lot more of the investing than I am.
Sure. Probably the first and foremost is I would question any spending requests related to storage. And because knowing the data is key to implementing all of your future AI initiatives, that if you're making decisions today that it will paint you into a corner tomorrow or could end up being a sunk cost, that would probably be the first thing I would think about. And then, from an initial implementation and adoption, having that secure chat that is obfuscating any confidential information in your business and giving people easy access to general information is key. And the step behind that is what's called RAG, the retrieval augmented generation, of using that same chat type of interface to get access to your company specific information without it exiting the business. I would think of some of the quick wins and places that you could get quick return.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, what are the first steps if you're not currently taking steps? And so where do you get the most leverage? And the most leverage of getting control around it will be around the first two things: is setting a policy in place. That doesn't take a lot of time, but is a starting point. And finding someone who can either fully dedicate themselves to AI inside the organization or dedicate themselves to a substantial amount of time, maybe half of their time. It could be up or down the stack, but just somebody who could be thinking about it all the time. Now you have somebody who can go and implement stuff when the rest of the organization might suggest it. But then the question is, what do you go and implement first, and what's the investment required around that? I think, Bryan, to your point of the stuff that avoids the shadow AI, that's your first step. I mean, that's the initial collar that differentiates it away from ChatGPT, where it's random logins and no accounting and not integrated with your internal authorization system. So that's like, hey, use AI kind of like you're using it now, with a little bit of policy and a little bit of control. You start there. And by using that and trying to help people figure out how to make that function in their domains inside the business, now you're on the step to be able to start making larger investments. Okay, what will the implications be for our workforce? Will we need to upskill current employees, hire AI specialists, or seek external partners? And I think this also dovetails into the previous question a little bit in terms of like one of my my KRs for Q4 is percentage usage of Expedient workforce. So that's our own internal usage. And the thought being, hey, how can we make it easily accessible for folks? And by making it accessible, we'll start to get usage. And by getting usage, we'll start to get feedback of how people want the system to work or where they're hitting stumbling blocks or whether by specific areas of the business or others. But I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to also address the emotional or existential questions that come along with AI, which is this going to replace my job? What value do I bring to the table? And the reality is that humans are kind of like chefs. The AI is more like ingredients in the stew, and that chef capability is our natural human capability, and we need to help people be in that chef mode more than just the carrot chopper that puts the stuff in the stew. That is going to be a painful emotional change for people as they hopefully in the long term it won't be painful, but the notion quickly is like, look, you have to learn this new thing and how to manage it like a chef, as opposed to being a person that's chopping the carrots. So all the carrot chopping, we're outsourcing that to AI over time, and it's just going to take a little bit of time to figure that out. And us as leaders, we're going to have to help folks get comfortable with it as much as you can be comfortable. What are some of your thoughts, Bryan?
Yeah, I think that you need to look at when that question about workforce. It's one is the user perspective, which I think you touched on primarily, and I think that's just part of what our existence has been over time. When the tractor came along, that changed how we planted fields and all the work that was done manually to from cars to computers to the internet and so on. So the type of work that we do now as normal compared to 100 years ago or 20 years ago is just different. And so I don't think it's a huge change from that type of adaptation. It's the type of worker that this is definitely a knowledge worker that is having an impact to. So if you provide the enablement to show them how it gets used as a tool, just like a tractor was back in the day for farming, then I think that you help assuage some of those concerns and fears that it's not a replacement, that you're actually increasing the efficiency or giving them work that's more interesting to do along the way. Now, the other part of the workforce, as far as upskilling or do we use specialists, I think that also will change over time. That I would say early on, for your best result and to get your fastest return on investment or in value is likely working with a partner of somebody that's implemented multiple projects for other clients, has seen similar work to what you're doing. And even though it's early innings, there's people that have been in the space for years versus if you've been in it for months. So early on, a partner and a specialist is going to be really important to get that best result. As the knowledge becomes more standard, you'll see people build internal teams more over time.
Makes sense. Okay, where in our current operations can AI drive the most significant efficiencies, reduce costs, or improve productivity? So the area that folks seem to be focusing on currently with AI POCs, but also more operational deployments, is around customer support and customer service. That's one. And the other is if you happen to be coding at all in your business, that's kind of another high leverage one. But in terms of customer support, we look at it internally as not so much the pure cost efficiency, but how do you increase the quality of your customer support? So, for instance, when a ticket case comes in, how do you take a look against your knowledge base and say, here's some possible ways that we think you could solve this? So it starts the kind of engagement off right. Again, we still have the human involved. It's not like the AI is not talking directly to the client. And then at the end, you have that evaluation that says, okay, the customer asked for these three things. a variety of conversation happened in a ticket. Did we meet or exceed the expectations and answer the initial questions? So like those types of things, you're saving in terms of efficiency hours of time. At the initial part, it's all of that research and looking in 10 different places to try and correlate how to answer that question. And on the egress side, it's reviewing that whole dialogue that may have happened over the course of a month, depending on the complexity and the variance of the issue, to say, okay, we can sign off well on this. So there's a significant efficiency gain on just the customer support side. On the coding side, you can have these models either built in as a co-pilot or actually in a creative sense. But the notion of not as a coder having to remember all of the different functions and kind of capabilities built into a specific language and having it autocomplete is like a 40-50% speed up in workflow. And it's things that as a computer programmer, you kind of don't want to have to remember. You want to get to the meat of solving business problems and not exactly the syntax of a specific thing. So, that's, I think, one of the outcomes of implementing AI directly is we can focus on the more interesting problems and not so much on the rote memorization. So those are two kind of areas of current operation that people are using AI in, like turning from proof of concept to actual internal implementation. Bryan, do you have any other thoughts?
I would agree with those as the top two. And I think the sales and marketing section would be the third. And that's really tied to twofold of mass customization, where you can take the information you have about your client, the industry they're in, the role that they have in the business, and you can adjust messaging to them specifically. But then you can also ingest information about your product suites. And if there's areas that somebody doesn't have certain portions of your product suite, and most of your other clients do, to suggest that and even write and explain why it might be a fit for that specific industry, that specific business. It is pretty interesting how quickly you can generate those content for mass customization, or also the speed that you can do the first draft, because like we talked about in the webinar, you don't want it to be the final product likely at this point. But doing that first draft, you can really move much faster and have something that you can iterate from.
Yeah, and this one isn't really a productivity gain, but I've found it to be an excellent teacher and assistant when I'm trying to learn something. So if I don't know a term, somebody throws out an acronym and I'm in like a sales meeting or a webinar, I can be able to look that kind of stuff up on the fly and drill into the areas that don't make a lot of sense to me, which may be areas that already do make a lot of sense to Bryan. So where he would drill in using this as an educational tool would be different. So I don't know how that improves productivity or efficiency, but it certainly improves the quality of interactions that you would have with other people at the company, so you can kind of get where they're coming from and what they're saying. Okay, how can AI provide us a competitive edge or differentiate our products and services? So I'll give a general kind of piece here, which is, what is AI particularly good at? And we'll use the MRI example, that AI can generally detect lung cancer in an MRI 2 years before a human can. But what's an MRI? MRI is a giant mountain of layers of data that AI can pick the needle out of the haystack with. And so as you're looking at your particular company, to the extent that you sit on proprietary data that talks about your secret sauce or your recipes, it could be the way you do your supply chain, it could be how you make certain things, that's extremely valuable. And it's also hard for a human to find the patterns inside of there that could unlock future value. So as you think about your own product, if your product involves a lot of data, that's a great spot for AI to try and find some use cases of, how do I extract more value out of what I already have? If your business has been in business for 100 years, 25 years like Expedient, there's a lot that sits out there that kind of has cobwebs on it, but can actually, help you develop insights of where to take things in the future. Likely the answer's already inside of your company as to how you can grow and differentiate. It's not something external that magically is going to happen, but you just need to figure out how to unlock it. So you can't say exactly where the competitive edge is, but getting really smart about the data that you have inside of your company will be where the competitive edge comes from.
Yeah, and I think most of the answer is actually just by restating the question. Instead of how can AI provide, it's more how can better access to your own data give you a competitive edge or differentiator. And so I think you went through a lot of that, and it's how you can give that differentiated client experience, having something that's more personalized to them, and making your employees and your team appear more intuitive, and anticipating what they're likely going to need based on different trends and available information that the data sources were just so large before a human couldn't see those correlations or tie it together. And that's how why the data, the storage platforms, all those things tie together to being the foundation that this really is fueled by.
Great. Okay, how will we measure our AI initiative success and return on investment? What KPIs should we be tracking? Bryan, you can start with that one.
I think that you need to start with the process that you're in, understanding your current process. So the initiatives that we're doing internally, we went through and documented what the current steps are, what the approach is, how long it takes to do task X or Y. And then as we're implementing that, and then also, what's the success rate from those different areas? And we can go back and we have a hypothesis of, we think by implementing this project that it's going to have this return. And here's how we would leverage those resources to do other things for our clients. So taking that baseline early on, and we actually do an internal process where we'll do a kind of a why statement of why are we even doing it, and we have a formal process of what that looks like, and then a how we're going to attack it. So, and then what we think the impact is. So then we can go back and measure back against that and do additional tweaks.
Yeah. So part of me loves the analytics of KPIs and OKRs, and it's language that I've always used to deliver on results. I think companies should have a strong analytic and metric-based foundation to kind of come back to keep them on the right path. But there's this other part of what's going on in AI right now, which is it's experimental. Like, we're learning things, we're breaking things, we're deploying proofs of concept, we're trying to figure out where's our data and how do we get it in the right spaces. And so if you apply too rigorous KPIs and IRRs and ROI, all of that stuff on top of it, this thing is in its beginning, and that's a delicate time. And it needs to be cared for in a little bit of a different way than a process that's been in place for 30 years. And so there needs to be room to be creative and experiment. And inside of larger companies that have been in business for a long time with standard processes, the notion of like what Expedient did, where we carved out an area of the business for AI where we could be experimental, is, I think, important to be able to realize the value. So to Bryan's point earlier about aligning some of AI to OKRs that we already have and how can that incrementally improve, I think that's a great way to show value. But then the separate side is where can this be transformative? And that's the one where it gets a little muddier. So if you just did transformative by itself, it's kind of hard to justify to the CEO of the board, like, why should we invest in here? But if you don't experiment with it, you'll never find what the transformative capabilities of AI are. And so kind of try and figure out how to do both of those at the same time. So I think that's a thought on the ROI and KPI. Okay, with so much discussion online about AI, what's the best way to separate the hype and the noise from actual quality information. So I get this question almost every time I tell people that my title is the SVP of AI. They're like, what, like, is this garbage, or is this another blockchain, or those types of things? Legit, you should be asking this question immediately. And what I find is, or how I was able to get confidence around it, is like, who's talking about it? Are these the smartest people that we have? Are these people that seem more like they're just hyping things? And so the folks that are talking about this are like scientists and technicians. They don't really know how to hype that much. They're coming from the PhD level. This is at the core technological level. And so what gave me foundation was finding folks to read from. And so, like, in the success packet that you're going to get, there's a variety of like newsletters that I read every day. So instead of a newspaper, probably go through 10 newsletters, and they're from trusted sources. So I'm like, okay, you can't always believe everything everybody says, but you'll get a confluence of information to be like, I can kind of trust this type of stuff. That's one side of it, which is the more like, is this thing real, and what can I do with it? The other side is use cases. So we can all talk about all the math and science and all these capabilities, but like, who is actually deploying this stuff, and how are they doing it at scale? And that will resolve all of the questions. And there's lots of great resources out there, but generally what you'll do is you'll go to a premier vendor. Expedient could be one of them, Vast Data, Elastic, VMware, and see what are they putting up there in terms of their use cases that are enterprise related. So that's, I find that reality in those webinars to be a lot more informative than maybe research papers and things about what AI could do. I want to see what AI has actually done.
Yeah, the couple of things I would add, it would be also people that can actually assist you in doing your own proof of concept and putting it into action, or showing you that crawl, walk, run inside your own business. Because there's a lot of hype and people that can talk about it. It's a different conversation for the people that can actually demonstrate or show it to you. And the other really cool thing is, it's kind of like the early days of the internet, that people are really open about their learnings and education, and what they're figuring out as they go through their own AI journey. So find peers, leverage some of those groups to just have a conversation and trade information. Even surprisingly, sometimes with people you would think of as a competitor that may be in the similar line of business that you are really open to sharing, because it's moving your entire space forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, Brian. There's a notion that it's okay to be vulnerable on AI. Like, we each have a portion of it understood, and we need that to be completed by other thought leaders. And so I found it to be very collegial, and it does remind me back when the internet was first talking off. But yeah, I wanted to kind of wind up the Q&A, and thanks, Brian, for participating on it. We're going to be sending each of you out a success packet, and what it is going to be a landing page with a whole bunch of different resources like policy guides and newsletters and McKinsey reports and all that kind of stuff. But think about it as a web page that kind of collects what we thought are the best things you can read to get your hands around it. And I hope that can be of some value. And then also there'll be the ability, if you wanted to chat in more detail, and at a high level, at a low level, highly technical, very strategic, I'm available to schedule one-on-ones, from the briefing level down to the code level. And I'd love to chat and learn about what you're doing with AI and the challenges that you're running into. And I'm happy to share those same things about, from our perspective. So thank you so much for participating, and I look forward to future conversations.
Thanks much.